Welcome to Marine Tech Talk, a podcast about how Teledyne Marine's innovative technologies are enabling scientific discoveries and commercial tasks. In this episode, we'll be speaking with Jude Van der Meer, a glider technician with Dalhousie University in Halifax, Nova Scotia. Jude works on the Coastal Environmental Observation Technology and Research Team, or CEOTR. Jude works with Dalhousie's fleet of gliders that are used for whale monitoring, predominantly in the Gulf of St. Lawrence and the Roseway Basin. Now, here's Jude Van der Meer with the host of Marine Tech Talk, Melissa Rossi.
Jude, this is really interesting because I know you're working a lot with the gliders and with the whales stuff. Can you explain, first of all, what you do at Dalhousie and then what project you've been working on?
Yep. So our team at Dalhousie has a whole fleet of slocumgliders, Teledyne Web slocumgliders, and LRI wave gliders. I specifically work primarily with the slocumgliders, which are buoyancy-driven profiling gliders. My job is kind of the whole suite of everything and getting ready for these gliders to go to sea for specific missions. So it's mission planning, talking with the PIs, the primary investigators of the study, to make sure that we can accomplish what they want to do. Mm-hmm. And then it's actually physically preparing the gliders, so putting on the different sensors that we need, making sure that they can talk to the glider so that everything's working properly. Moving forward from that, it's making sure that the platform as a whole works, that it's ballasted properly for the water that it's going to go into. So there's a whole suite of tests that we need to do for that to make sure that that's going to go ahead as planned. Additionally, once the glider's prepared and we sort of have a mission plan, we've talked to the PIs, we know what kind of battery life we're going to get. We have to determine how we're going to get the glider out. So we have our own boat that I tow around with the truck and I pilot, but at the same time, sometimes we require help from people with larger vessels to get out.
Sure.
And so part of my job is talking to local fishermen and
so really using vessels of opportunity,
vessels of
right?
opportunity,
Whatever's
exactly.
around, sure. So, for these projects, or for this specific project, what sensors are on board? Are there special sensors for your whale project?
Yeah, so the one, I guess, most important sensor for this project is the DMON, and it's a hydrophone designed by Mark Baumgartner at Woods Hole Institute. It's a pretty neat system. It's not just the hydrophone, it's also a whole system which basically has a whole library of whale calls from 5 different baleen whales. So the blue whale, the sei whale, the humpback whale, the fin whale, and the North Atlantic right whale. So it has this library of calls and it's constantly listening as the glider's flying. And when the hydrophone hears a certain call from a whale, it can match the track, what we call a pitch track, against this library call that it has, and in real time can say, I have heard this whale in the area. When it hears one of these whales, it sends back this pitch track that it's recorded through the glider to our server, which eventually gets relayed on to a team of analysts who can actually guarantee that we've seen this whale, or verify that we've seen this whale.
So how long do the gliders stay out, typically?
So for most of these missions with the whale team, we try to keep the gliders out for several months. So we use the lithium primary battery packs, which Teledyne Web provides. The longest mission we've had in the Gulf of St. Lawrence has been 4 months, but they can be as short as 1 month depending on the different battery that we use and what is needed.
What about the depth? What depth are you looking at?
So we operate in 2 different areas right now primarily. We operate in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. It's a fairly shallow area where we are. We're just to the west, or the east, of Shippagan, and just above the Gaspé Peninsula of Quebec, just a little bit below the main shipping lane going into Quebec. In the Gulf of St. Lawrence, it's a fairly shallow area. We only get as deep where we're operating as around just below 200 meters, I would say. In the other area that we're operating, which is the Roseway Basin, which is off southwest Nova Scotia, we are running transects across a deep basin, or what we call a deep basin, but it still only gets down to around 200 meters. But in that mission, we're almost always at 200 meters-ish. And when we're in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, we're generally around, on average, probably 50 to 60 meters. It's a fairly shallow area.
So on a 3-4 month mission that you typically go on, just curious, how many whales would a glider run across?
I know since 2014, which is how long we've been running this program, we have detected around 800 North Atlantic right whale calls. 600 possible detections and 800 definite detections. In the last 2 years, 2019 and the last year, 2018, were probably the years that we've heard the most right whales consistently in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. Previously, we would hear quite a few right whales in the Roseway Basin in the fall coming into the winter. In the early summer, we would hear quite a few in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. Since the beginning of 2018, we have been predominantly hearing the North Atlantic right whales in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, and actually haven't heard on our gliders while surveying any right whales in the Roseway Basin. And this is an issue that the whale team that we work with is looking into, because the Gulf of St. Lawrence is there's a lot of fishing pressure, and there's also a main heavy shipping lane coming right above.
Right.
And so the movements or the migration and different feeding areas that the right whales are now using seems to put them at higher risk of coming into contact with us, with humans. And two of their leading causes of mortality or injury right now are vessel strikes and fishing gear entanglements.
Okay. So the data that you are collecting, one of the interesting things I sort of picked up when you were talking, is it the North Atlantic right whale data that you're most interested in? Because your gliders have a sensor that picks up 5 different whales, but it seems the focus is on the right whale. Is that correct? Or?
Yeah, so the researchers with the whale group at University of New Brunswick and at Dalhousie, led by Kim Davies and Chris Taggart, they are interested definitely in all of the whales, but the North Atlantic right whale, they're very much at risk. There's less than 400 individuals left in the species, so that is definitely where a large amount of effort is going into right now.
Yeah, so then now you have this data. Obviously, it addresses 2 different things, or it can be used for 2 different ways. People who are interested in the vessel strike side of it and the human interaction, fisheries entanglement side of it. Yep. Where does that data go, do you know?
The data that we collect is actually served up publicly. Okay. So everybody basically has access to it to some extent. The whale team, with that data, they will look at why the whales have moved from one area to another area.
Sure.
How can we use variables that we collect with, say, the gliders that we're using to predict where whales will be in order to mitigate some of this overlap or change areas that the fishery operates or perhaps the vessels move through in order to avoid these collisions and fishing gear entanglements. The scientists are, they're interested in why the whales are in different areas. But at the same time, the real-time data gets served up to a whole suite of different websites. But one of them is Whale Map, which is created by Hanson Johnson at Dalhousie University. And basically, it's updated constantly. There's sort of a real-time pinout of where whales have been detected, both by our gliders, actually, I should say, and visual surveys of, I think, NOAA scientists and DFO individuals flying over with airplanes, doing in aircrafts, I should say. This data the idea is supposed to be made available to the Shipping Federation, Transport Canada, in order to alert mariners who are traveling through areas where right whales have been detected to see if they can divert their course. At the same time, DFO, Department of Fisheries and Oceans in Canada, they can tap into this information in order to dynamically change areas of fishing pressure. If a right whale's been spotted in an area, I don't remember the exact specifics of how the regulation works, but essentially they will say, you can't fish in this area for now until a whale has no longer been spotted in that area. So they'll essentially shift where the fisheries can operate in that area. So I guess, a real-time part of the data that's collected, and then there's the more underlying, why are the whales moving and why are they behaving as they are.
Right. And then there's sort of the rapid response of, can you divert your ship to a different area or take a different path to get where you need to go to avoid where we've just seen some whales. And then there's the fisheries side of it, which probably can't react quite as quickly, I would think, because certain regulations have to be put in or stops to fishing.
They've written it up differently for this past year, I know for sure, or the fishermen know that it's now a dynamic fishery. So the areas that they're allowed to operate in change, and it actually is a fairly rapid response in that. In the Shipping Federation side, the way that Transport Canada regulates that currently, if a whale has been spotted in the shipping lanes or in and around certain areas, or if an aircraft hasn't been, like there's no glider and an aircraft hasn't been able to transect over the shipping lane, they will impose a mandatory speed limit there where the boats actually have to slow down if they come through there. So another area of what we're hoping to do is if a glider can be in that area monitoring for whales, and we can with certainty say that there aren't any whales in that area, even if it is too stormy and not a good day for visual sightings of whales, they don't necessarily need to impose the speed limit because there aren't any whales because our gliders haven't heard any in the area. But that's still obviously a work in progress, and there's potential.
So do you know how far a whale sound carries? I mean, if your glider hears the sound of a whale, how far away might that whale be?
We have been working to sort of range. I know Mark Baumgartner's done some work with these hydrophones, and Hansen and our team has been doing also some trials at sea while deploying the gliders. Measuring at discrete locations away from the hydrophone, just making like a constant sort of a whale-like noise and seeing what kind of range we can detect. I don't know any of the final numbers for that, but I know we are working towards actually getting a better idea of ranging these.
Yeah, because that might give you some idea of how far away or, how far they're spaced or, how far away you are from them.
Yep.
Yeah, that's really interesting. What's your normal season that you're out? Is it year-round?
For this project specifically, hasn't been year-round. We've tended to start in around the beginning of June in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. We'll deploy a series of gliders in the past, which will transect in different areas up and down, and they will stay in there until generally, in the past 2 years at least, November.
Wow, okay.
And we'll try to pull out our gliders before a lot of the harbors start freezing over because it's tough to recover them after that. And then we operate in the Roseway Basin off of southwest Nova Scotia. We start in the fall and we'll run up until generally the beginning of lobster season down there, which is the last week of November. And the idea is to keep a glider in there to potentially catch the migration of the whales back down around Cape Cod.
So have there ever been any interactions with the gliders and the whales? I mean, are the whales, I don't know, I know sometimes animals are funny about some of our autonomous vehicles, and other times they just don't really even notice them. So I'm just curious if there's ever been in it.
It's hard to say because we don't really have any way of knowing. There could definitely be whales nudging up against our slocum
just to find
glider
out what
just
it
to
is.
see what it is, but we wouldn't really have a good way of knowing that. We have Hansen, myself, and another technician, Tyler, that I work with. We were out in our Zodiac deploying one of these gliders, and we're surrounded by a pod. I think it was around 20 right whales in the larger area. And the only reason we know that is because there was a visual survey on an airplane going on above us. So while we were deploying our glider, we were surrounded by right whales, which I think were feeding at the time. They were all on the surface and rolling around. And
that must have looked incredible.
Yeah, it was amazing. It was amazing to be with that many individuals of such a small population in such a small area.
Were you in a little boat or a big boat?
It was a 7-meter Zodiac, so it was really small.
They're pretty big animals, right?
But they stayed a cautious distance away from us, or we tried to stay, I guess, a good distance away from them. It was pretty neat. Our glider was there, the whales were there. the visual surveys were happening, and actually a research vessel with Kim Davies, the lead, was not that far away from us either, doing whale sightings and doing zooplankton net tows to see what kind of food was in the area. So it was kind of the whole project really kind of came together in one moment, I guess.
Yeah, wow.
So it was neat.
That is pretty neat. What's your favorite thing about your job? It sounds pretty amazing to me. I'm sure there are a lot of people who'd love to do your job.
Yeah, I think one thing is I got to play with robots regularly. And
always a favorite, because you can see every time we get anywhere where we've got the gliders, everybody's like, oh, what's that?
Yeah, and people are always really interested, so you get to explain them what they do, and I guess that's a pretty fun part. It's also pretty neat to rip around. I've definitely explored Atlantic Canada more now after like towing around a boat and jumping on different fishermen's vessels and stuff. I've talked to a lot of different people through this job that way. And just being on the water, of course, is
it's always
in
nice.
the summer nice.
And colder in November.
Less nice, not in the summer.
Is there somewhere that the listeners could find out more about what you're doing with the whale research, maybe on Dalhousie's website or somewhere else?
Yeah, so the CEOTR, definitely, CEOTR at dal.ca, I believe.
So that's CEOTR, CEOTR.
Yeah.
I was surprised to learn that too, so
Yeah.
I figured people listening might not know that. So CEOTR for CEOTR, which actually stands for Coastal Environmental Observation Technology and Research.
Yeah, thank you. And also this whale map I was talking about is also available. If you Google whale map, it will come up. If you Google whale map and right whales, it will definitely come up, and then you can actually see where whales have been sighted recently, both with the gliders. You can play around. You can only glider sightings, only plane sightings, only right whale, only sei whale, etc.
Oh, that's really cool,
so it's
actually.
Hanson's done a really good job. It's really, really neat. I just got to play with it for the first time recently, and I was very impressed. So that's another place that you can go to look for some more information. This project is funded by Ocean Tracking Network, OFI, which is Ocean Frontier Institute, and MEOPAR, which is Marine Environmental Observation, Prediction and Response Agency. And we partner with DFO, Department of Fisheries and Oceans. So.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah.
I've learned a ton today. Thank you for all the great work you do.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Marine Tech Talk podcast. To find out more about the whale monitoring work that Dalhousie is conducting with gliders, you can Google Dalhousie CEOTR gliders, or look at the show notes for this episode on Teledyne Marine's website. You'll also find more information on the whale map that Jude mentioned at whalemap.ocean.dal.ca. If you have any comments or questions about this show, you can email host Melissa Rossi at marinetechtalk@teledyne.com. If you like this podcast, please make sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're hearing the show. That way, you'll never miss an episode. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you again next time.